a qualitative way rather than a quantitative way.
Okay. They were kind of a commentary, which I doubt that you'll disagree with, but that's up to you.
That's up to you. Yes. Sorry, the other question I had was I was really quite shocked when the resident talked about the person conducting the survey saying what other people had said, what his sort of, my straw poll, what my tot up. And I think that's incredibly unprofessional, and also gives, basically people are swayed by public opinion. Oh, well, everybody else is saying this, so maybe I'll say it as well. And I think that was is something that should be looked into, actually.
Right, Councillor Simpson.
Thanks very much. Okay, I'm just going to sort of pull back a little bit. I mean, it seems to me that we're kind of talking about three separate buckets here when it comes to the survey. Firstly, purpose. What is the survey fundamentally for? Secondly, content. What's actually in the survey? And thirdly, methodology. How is the survey carried out? Now, it sort of sounds, based on what Councillor Bennett is saying, that the purpose of the survey is basically to be a sort of non-binding gauge of residents' opinions as to basically what their preference would be out of the viable options, and also kind of any feelings that they have around sort of the execution within the options and kind of where they feel the trade-offs are and what's most important to them and what's least important to them. And I'm sure you'll correct me if I've got that wrong. If that is the case, that does sort of feed into content, because it seems to me that the process should be you look at the options, you then get a list of the viable options, and you then go to residents and say, here are the viable options, here are kind of the flavours within those options, here are the decisions that we're going to, and the trade-offs that inform those options, what are your feelings on that? And that, that can be literally tick boxing, option 1, option 2, within option 1, variant ABC, within option 2, ABC, what's most important to you, not having to move twice, or doing this or doing that or whatever. And it kind of feels like we didn't really have a strategic, here are the options, and then the survey. It sort of feels like there were two processes that maybe weren't really talking to each other, and that's kind of why we've got some of this mess. And that's really the content, because this doesn't really feel like it's generating those kind of quantitative outcomes that perhaps can really help inform the discussion. And then just lastly on methodology, I mean, I appreciate that the actual methodology, the actual process of gathering it was outsourced, which is, I can kind of understand given that you want it done arm's length, but it does sound like there are people with concerns as to their experiences on the doorstep, and that's perhaps certainly something that needs to be borne in mind with kind of any subsequent survey of this nature, that the companies that we're using to carry out these surveys know that they're to go about it in kind of respectful and courteous fashion, and kind of make it clear to residents what the deal is, because there seems to be some confusion as to what the survey was for, and some anger as to how it was carried out.
All good points. Councillor Bigham.
To respond to them. But I just want to ask specifically on data protection, what assurances you were given from the company Acuity around data protection. I think given what's been said about people's personal details being on each of the forms, and perhaps some, at least oblique references to what other people have said in that, and that there were appropriate measures taken by the company to protect people's personal data, particularly given the sensitivity of the case.
Thanks very much. Do you want to just quickly wrap up on that? I'm conscious of the time. Obviously, I've got two more parts of the call in to cover.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you, councillors, and Bigham for those points, all of which I think are quite right and accurate in some of the issues that you've raised, and particularly Councillor Simpson around purpose. I think there's one additional thing I'd want to add here to the purpose of the test opinion, which was that an awful lot of residents on the estate weren't coming to a lot of the workshops that were being run. There was a feeling that we were talking to a part of the estate, but not necessarily getting the views of everybody on the estate, and hence the desire for this to actually have some of those open-ended questions, because in a lot of the workshops it was tell us your views open-endedly, and a desire to try and capture some more of that. Councillor Bingham's point on data protection, obviously all of the results were anonymised, and if you look on page 149 at the start of that test of opinion, there are reassurances that are provided there about strictest confidence in terms of assurances that were given by Acuity to the council rather than from Acuity to residents. I am going to ask people who actually worked with Acuity rather than me to respond to that, because I can't.
Acuity have assured us that the data is all protected. We have results of the survey, but we only have it in an anonymised form. So we have no ability to actually disaggregate it down to actually identify the individual circumstances and things like that.
Okay, that's great. If we can move on to Councillor Ainsley's second part of the call-in, which was on the viability assessment of the finances. Again, just to ask if there are any residents who had a specific point on that. Mr. Keene is indicating, do you want to come up here? Introduce yourself again and
Okay.
two minutes. I'm going to have to be slightly strict now because I am running out of time.
Okay.
Concise, thank you.
I'm a leaseholder. I've had to read over 1,000 pages of documents in my own time in the last week to get to this process, to be involved in a system that I don't understand particularly, and I've had to learn over the past week. I've had to curtail to the council's sort of structures and systems and methodology. I don't feel the council in this process has curtailed to my situation, and to really try and work with me to understand all this stuff. So now I'll start my statement, which I've handed out to everybody. Lambeth Council has not allowed residents to review the methodology and calculations in the latest financial models produced by Airey Miller. Scant information is provided in the viability report, much less than was provided in the Somerleyton Road development. As a result, I have serious concerns and risks. There's a huge amount of key missing information. No details of a special purpose vehicle, an SPV, have been provided, yet the December 2014 Cabinet report specified that the costs of setup and operations of an SPV would need to be part of financial assessment. I think the same report, and perhaps Matthew can help with this, it was either the December one or perhaps it's the July one, said specifically that transfer of ownership would mean that the council would not own these properties, wouldn't own any new development. They are owned by a private company, by an SPV, which we have no details about. I just want to make that absolutely clear. It says it in the report. As Councillor Ainsley says, one of the missing bits of information, a major water pipeline runs through Cressingham Estate, really close to the surface, and this information was not provided to Airey Miller, even though they specified that these kinds of service redirections, all these kinds of things, would have financial implications. The viability assessment doesn't appear to take into account rental income from tenants whose homes would be refurbished under option 4. The correction of this error could potentially result in savings of £9 million. Cressingham Gardens is a net cash contributor to the Lambeth Housing Revenue account. And I want to know what will be the impact of the loss of Cressingham Gardens rental income on the account. Will cuts have to be made? I sort of feel there's just not enough detail to really understand such a radical, and that's how it's defined in the report, of how such a radical sort of proposition could go forward. There is no definition of what break-even means. Is the council being asked to annually subsidise the development for the next 44 to 60 years, or is there a risk of being allowed to fund with long-term debt? It's very incredibly dense financial information. I've had to read 1,000 pages of documentation. Cabinet members are supposed to read all of that documentation over a weekend. I think it needs a hell of a lot more scrutiny to really understand the financial conditions and risks.
That's over 3 minutes, and I meant to only have 2.
Oh, what could I just make? You can read it, that's true. Yeah, I think the key point is that the viability of of the special purpose vehicle is currently unknown, and that was defined as needing to be there by July 2015, and it's not there.
Okay, thank you very much. Yep.
Ron Hollis, I'm a tenant of Lambeth, but not on the affected estates. I'm Vice Chair of Clapham Area Housing Forum. I'm also represent Lambeth tenants at London Tenants Federation, which speaks of GLA. The lack of trusted viability studies leads to huge distrust of councils and developers and etc. across the board, because many people see it as an area where it is very hidden and where corruption would be very difficult to determine, because no one ever gives anyone any figures. And the GLA Housing Committee is quite clear now that viability studies should be open and public documents, except where there's a requirement by the Data Protection Service to protect individuals. One of the strange things about the viability study here is the question, the whole thing about commercial confidentiality. I am fairly familiar with much of the building stuff that happens in Lambeth and across London in terms of these things, and I fail to understand exactly what the commercial sensitivity considerations are. We need to know what those. There may well be entirely legitimate reasons for conceding a small amount of information in the viability studies. But the fact is that it's very difficult for anyone outside of council officers to know exactly what the whole story is. There should be a determination within the council to ensure that all of the information in viability studies is made available. And where there is good reason to keep information secret, that the reason for it being kept secret should be made public as well. Because certainly we want to protect the ability of the council to enter into commercial dealings, but not at the cost of residents, not at the cost of trust, and not at the cost of the environment that we have here, which is based on baffled ignorance of key facts and a lack of trust in the council to actually deliver on much of the stuff that they promise. So I would urge the council, not only in this particular case, but across all of the regeneration, to ensure that all viability studies are public documents that people are free to peruse and criticise and argue about, because then we'll all at least be able to have an argument based on fact rather than speaking from our various prejudices.
Thank you, Mr. Hollis. Very useful. Anyone else on this specific point?
Yes, I understand this.
Could you introduce yourself?
Robert Langtree. I live on the Tulshill estate. This viability study was for borrowing over a period of 50 years. I had a chat with a director of a large property company. They said they'd never go over 30 years. I can remember London in the 1970s when it suddenly depopulated. This sort of rise in population is very sudden. It can go down just as quickly. And Lambeth would be stuck with a huge debt. I think 50 years is far too long for you to carry the debt.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else on that specific point? Okay, Councillor Bennett. Working backwards, 50 years is a very unusual and very long time to carry that kind of debt. Ron, Mr. Hollis's points about lack of trust in viability studies, the GLA Housing Committee's recommendations that they should be open, and the fact that he believes that there hasn't been a proper explanation of why bits of this are so secret, and there should be a presumption of openness where possible, not only in this case but more generally. And Tom's lots of points about significant details are missing around the special purpose vehicle. I seem to recall you saying earlier that the SPV would be wholly owned by the council, but you might want to repeat that or clarify. This business of the water pipes come up a couple of times, and I haven't heard you respond to that, so that would be useful.